So welcome to our talks. Tonight our speaker is Kent Christensen, a painter and an illustrator. Kent Christensen investigates cultural and personal associations with food, place, art history, religion, and popular culture. His work references both the classical still life tradition of the 16th and 17th centuries and the surrealist and pop art movements of the 20th century. His paintings, prints, and sculptures have been exhibited in the US and UK regularly since 2006. He is also a nationally recognized illustrator with clients including Time, Sports Illustrated, Rolling Stone, Business Week, and the Los Angeles Times. He was born in Los Angeles and lives and works in New York City and Sundance, Utah. To learn more about his work, please visit his website, kentchristensen.com. Please welcome Kent Christensen.
Wow, I wasn't expecting that. You guys are all so quiet. Yeah. Well, it's good to be here. I just was curious, how many of you are from Utah? Most of you. All right. Any East Coast people? New Yorkers? Yeah. California, West Coast people? All right. So I am actually not from Utah, but I did some school here and some school in California, which I'll tell you about later. Anyways, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite. Appreciate it. I am teaching the seniors up at UVU this semester about facing life in the real art world. So we deal with some interesting stuff that you'd probably be interested in too. And also, I'm just going to show you a sampling of my work over the decades, which is kind of crazy, since before you were born. But I have to say, one of the best things I ever heard about from my friends who are artists when I moved to New York 25 years ago was their advice to always stay around people who are really positive influences for you and your work. And you guys know how that is. It works that way even in school. You can have people around you who kind of suck the life out of you or your energy, and you can kind of be that way with other people too. So as an artist, it's really important for you to keep the energy level up and really positive. So try to be that person for your friends, and try to gravitate towards people who are going to serve you well in that sense as well for whatever your work is like. Like Amy said, I'm an illustrator originally and switched to painting more recently. As I have gravitated towards people that have been really good for me to be around over the years, I was in art school at Art Center in Pasadena with Mark Ryden, who is a really successful artist now, and I wanted to show you a video of him working in his studio. me up anywhere else. Okay. Which do you think came first? This came first, about a year before. Although Lady Gaga has never really said anything about it, as far as we know. When you read this on Mark Ryden's website, he talks a little bit about it down here. What did you think of Lady Gaga's meat dress? I got quite a flurry of emails the day after the awards show. It had been only a few months prior that I had exhibited my meat dress painting in New York. Indeed, after several other incidences, Gaga used blood and tears, things that he's used before, it does seem less and less likely to be mere coincidence. On the other hand, I am certainly not the only one to use the theme of meat in their art, and I am not the first to use meat as clothing. I don't think Lady Gaga was making any kind of political statement in wearing a meat dress. I think her motivation was simply to get attention, and that she certainly did. So, there is also an interesting compare and contrast photo. Here's the cover of Juxtapose. Some of you may have seen it's kind of a great pop art magazine with a good reproduction of the dress. And then below, the famous.
Oh my God.
Even the shoes are meat, right? I mean, how crazy is that? And I hear that it's been somehow chemically preserved in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So, you know, whatever. It's kind of it's a little bit of a Damien Hirst thing. Anyway, another artist whose work kind of does the surrealism pop art thing is Will Cotton. And Will Cotton is one of the nicest people that I have ever met. Chuck Close and Will Cotton, I hear, are the two nicest artists in terms of being positive and generous. And here's a really great video talking about a very similar thing to what happened with Mark Ryden, only with Katy Perry. Katie's not pretending that there's no influence, right? So check this out.
Hi everybody, it's Katy Perry, and welcome to the behind the scenes of my album cover with me and Mr. Will.
Welcome to MPS in Terre Haute, Indiana. We're a large format printer of folding cartons. We manufacture the Katy Perry CD.
Hey Randy, do you have the Katy Perry plates ready to go and hang?
You ready to run? Katy Perry?
Yeah.
All right, how big a run?
40,000.
We run what we call dry trap. We're running UV inks, so when this comes through this unit, the lights hit it, it's cured, and then when it comes out to delivery, the total sheet's dry.
This is the final product. Once it ships out to the other facility to get finished, the whole process is between 2 to 3 days.
I'm Richard Tucker with Multi-Packaging Solutions in Louisville, Kentucky, where we are taking pre-printed sheets and applying a cotton candy scent to the actual product. The end result is that we hope when somebody buys this piece, they will open the jewel case and they will get a cotton candy scent as soon as they open it. This is strictly new to us for Katy Perry. This is something she's requested.
EMI came to us with this project. They wanted to put a cotton candy scent on a regular CD booklet. We had never done that here before. We had to do some testing. It took us weeks to figure out how we were going to apply the scent. We tested it with coating. We tested it with varnish. We ended up applying it with a 50-50 mix with our overall print varnish, and that's how we ended up applying the scent to the job. It comes out smelling real sweet, and it's done very well.
Well, what we've done here is we have suspended the cotton candy scent within a varnish. And we are applying it on a standard Heidelberg 2-color press. Both units to get the maximum scent on the sheet. So the varnish is carried down through the roller train and applied to the sheet through the plate. The Katy Perry sheets are then sent through this press and the scent is applied. And here's where we would apply the scent.
This is new for us. We usually put varnish on jobs to help the sheen of the job. But this here we're laying down oil with it, giving it a cotton candy scent. And this is something new. We just do it for the first time.
As it goes through the bindery, it goes through the bindery from the press room in a flat sheet. We run it through our folder and it folds it up into a 2-up booklet. We take and put it on our stitcher. When it comes out of the stitcher, it is a finished product that goes into the box. We put about 800 in a box. We fold about 8,000 an hour and we stitch about 18,000 an hour.
Smelled it. I mean, I know it's out there, but what I love about the world we live in now is because popular culture is so crazy and out there, it is automatically surreal. Where back in the days of Andy Warhol, it wasn't necessarily so. But now, it's just like, really? Unique dress that's somebody's actually going to make it and wear? Cotton candy scented printed material, these guys were completely bewildered, even after they'd done it, right? Because of technology and because of communication, so many possibilities are out there now, and so I think it's really kind of a fascinating time to be involved in fine arts, especially if you're an artist like me. So yeah, pop art is realism. You just can't get away from it. Now I'm going to take you through the history of my career, which is really why we're here. Now this, when I was in high school in Southern California, I was saturated with popular culture at that time. Of course, there was already In-N-Out Burger back then, only there, before it went everywhere else. And everything else that California sort of is known for. And so I had this really great opportunity to go to the Saturday high school program at Art Center College of Design, which was in Los Angeles at the time, downtown Los Angeles, which that is what that is. Now, these people are actually older than even me. So this was like in the 60s, but that's the building we went to. And it exposed me to a world as a high school student that I had never experienced before. A little bit, reminds me a little bit of the way you have things here, really kind of intimate sense of, a huge sense of community. And then I went, after after a few years later, I went to BYU just to get out of California and to experience something new. And Utah was completely, totally, I was like going to the moon. So I had never been in winter really. I, didn't know what it was like to live where Mormons were the majority. It's just what a trip. It's still because I'm not from here, so I'm not used to that. And that also kind of has an influence on my work as well. So here I am back when BYU was black and white, and before they invented. But the best thing about my time at BYU was going with James Christensen, who is also a painter and now a good friend of mine. We had a really great drawing class, and he said, I want to take 8 people to Europe. I've done it before with bigger groups, but I just want to go, and I want these 8 people to not want to do anything touristy. We're just going to do art stuff. We're going to go to museums. We're going to take our paint with us. We're going to go out into the countryside of Spain and France. And so we did. We went all over Western Europe, and it completely changed my life to see these paintings. This in London in the National Gallery. Keep your eye on this is Holbein's Ambassadors, and it's an enormous painting. It's bigger than it is reproduced here. Really, it's probably 25% larger than that. Anybody know what that thing is at the bottom of the painting? Yeah. Once you know it's a skull, then you see it. But for the longest time, I remember taking my parents to the National Gallery a few years ago. And I said, okay, Dad, you need to go stand right here. And I made him stand like in this one spot. And then he freaked out. He said, oh my gosh, it's a skull. How did they do that? And I just said, Photoshop. My favorite museum, one of my favorites, is the Prado in Madrid. And if you've never been there, you must go there. Velasquez became one of my favorite artists from going there. This is his most famous painting, also enormous. In Italy, at the Uffizi, this is Birth of Venus, which marked the change from strictly religious art to more secular painting, commissioned by businessmen. But it also has almost a religious kind of feel to it as well. And then, of course, this is in Paris, in the Musée d'Orsay, the Van Gogh's room, which Van Gogh also kind of blew me away when I first saw his paintings in person. So I came back and I studied art history because I just got completely sidetracked by the art history. Then, by the end of my degree in art history at BYU, I really missed working as a painter. So I decided to go back to my old stomping grounds. By that time, they had built this brand new, amazing building up on the hillside in Pasadena. And it was a lot like when Amy showed me through your facility here. Super intimate, we knew everybody in that program because this school was only 1,000 students at the time. So imagine that. And what I loved about Art Center was being exposed to everything. Being exposed close quarters to packaging, graphic design, logo design, transportation design, cars all over the place, being sculpted out of clay. A phenomenal program. I highly recommend Art Center. And this is dog food. Look how easy is that, right? Just shake a little bit out and the dog eats it. Anyway, I'm sure the dog would just chew right through that too. But whatever. And then just sort of the whole energy of being in a place like that where you're kind of there 24/7, day and night, really immersed in the creative process. Really inspired me. So that also inspired me to go somewhere else that was like that, super intense. And I thought I would go to New York and stay for a couple of years. I went, and that was 25 years ago, and I'm still there part-time. It's a phenomenal place. Any of you been to New York? As an artist, you really can't beat it. I mean, the energy and everything in New York. If you want to talk about New York after the class, or after this, I'm always here. Just having so many museums you can walk to, the concentration of high-quality art that goes on there is really phenomenal. That was 1988. And I started getting work in magazines the year after that. because I had a school portfolio and I really didn't have a real portfolio. It still looked like a school portfolio. It took like about a year to get the portfolio looking like it needed to get work. So I started getting work with these obscure magazines. I mean, who's ever heard of Restaurant Business Magazine or Chemical Engineering Magazine? But it's work, and you get jobs working on these different things. And the funny things happened. When I was in Los Angeles, saving money for 2 years to move to New York, I couldn't get work in Los Angeles. As soon as I had a New York address and a fax machine and with a New York 212 phone number, oh, lo and behold, my friends back in Los Angeles think I'm real now, so they start giving me work. So I get all this work for the Los Angeles Times and LA Style, different magazines based on the West Coast, with a sort of signature style where I'm using the body as kind of a metaphor for different things. This was a story in the Los Angeles Times about how rumors can ruin a business. At that time, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a string of kind of conspiracy situations where someone would start a rumor about what they're putting in McDonald's hamburgers, or that there's some kind of satanic connection with Walgreens pharmacy, or weird stuff like that. And it would actually make the stock in these companies go down, and people stop going. So there was this whole article about it. It got a lot of exposure. I got an award for it, Communication Arts Magazine. And I didn't have to go out so much and get work. People started calling me because I was a published illustrator and I won an award. So I started getting real magazines people had heard of. And so then I could call my dad and mom in Los Angeles and say, yeah, I work doing illustrations for magazines that you can actually go to the store and see. And other newspapers as well. This was a story about Alzheimer's drug treatments. So like I said, I just used the body as kind of a surreal metaphor for different things. Flying Nutcracker. This was the funniest story I ever illustrated about. It was called A Fish Story for Outside Magazine. I still read it from time to time and it cracks me up. Back in these days, you would get pre-email, right? Pre-scanners, pre-digital world. We would get a fax with a story. It would spit the story out in this really nasty fax paper. You have to read it. Sometimes you wouldn't be able to read it very well. And then you would fax two or three sketches back, and then you would choose between those, and then you would have a deadline. And also the interesting thing, how different it is nowadays. To get a job like this, where there was this person who was really well known in the political world. He was a UN peace negotiator in the Balkans at the time, which is before you were even born, I'm sure. But anyway, this Japanese guy, I had never heard of him really or seen a picture of him. So Time Magazine would actually messenger over a whole envelope full of reference material. And there used to be a library in New York down 53rd Street where you could go and pull out these big drawers that were all alphabetical, and they all had just scrap reference material. Can you imagine that now? I mean, with Google makes it so easy. You can just see a picture of anything. If you guys have questions, you're welcome to shout them out, because we'll do questions afterwards too, but if you might forget if you have a thought in your mind. One thing that was really interesting about working in the late 80s and early 90s is computers were a brand new thing. And the problem with computers was they were so ugly. I mean, these things were, these keyboards, they were just chunky and hard, just ugly, kind of beige colored stuff. It was before Steve Jobs could do his magic, right? And so we didn't have anything like this at all. It would have been lovely to have the opportunity to render something like this. But so we had these awful looking computers, and if you could do something to make the computer more interesting, especially in the context of the story, you were golden. And so I got all these jobs to the point where I was sick and tired of putting a screen in a monster's head, or like the keyboard in his mouth, right? Same chunky keyboard, but at least it's in his mouth. This was about sound cards. Back before computers could talk, was a new thing when you had the sound card that would go on the computer. This was about computer games. I did a lot of work for computer magazines like Nobel and work for it. And then this is a fun story. I was in Maine, off the coast of Maine one summer, and I was on my way up there and got a call from Yankee Magazine, which was right kind of in Vermont. And they said, "Oh, we need this illustration. Can you do it?" And so I would love to do it because it was this Ulysses Grant thing. It was about this hotel tavern in Grafton in Vermont. And it was just like what I like to do, a caricature, really nice kind of piece, it paid well. And so I was calling FedEx and saying, is there any way you deliver to this island where they don't even have electricity? And he talks to somebody and finally says, yeah, we will pick up from the dock, every day at whatever time the last boat goes out. There's a boat in the morning and that boat in the afternoon. So I actually took my paint, my little watercolor pad, and I went out and I had my vacation for a week on this island. And the first few days I did this job. And then a couple of years later, I actually was in Vermont, walked into the Grafton Inn, not realizing where I was, and then I figured out that I'd actually illustrated the story about the very place that I went without knowing it. So, and after doing a lot of illustration right up until the early 2000s, I wanted to go back to get my master's degree, and because I like teaching, and I wanted to create a whole new body of work. Believe it or not, I kind of got burned out on doing, the same. The guys would call me up, the art directors would call me up and say, yeah, we really like that guy. I'm like, really? Could it be like a black person or a woman, please? But it always had to be a businessman in a suit with a tie, and I kind of got tired of it, so I needed to change. And I went to the University of Utah, and I started playing around with the kind of crazy surrealist tendencies within culture, like my Mormon culture, which I wasn't from Utah, so I moved to New York, and people knew that I was Mormon, but I wasn't from Utah, and I was from California. They knew I didn't have a lot of wives, but they knew that I didn't and they knew that I didn't smoke, and so we would go eat, and sometimes they would have their, but I wasn't like big into taboos either, so I was like, I did not want to have friends that, just because they smoked and drank. So one of my friends, who I got very close to over the years, she came to me one afternoon and said, I figured you out. Sugar is the Mormon heroin. You are so into sugar. It's like I go and have my beer, and you have the chocolate and the Macaroons and the eclairs, and you know all about herbal tea. What is up with that? And how many different kinds of hot chocolate you can make and have. Of course, New York is great for all that stuff too. So I thought, well, okay, I'm at the University of Utah. I'm going to really go deep into my dad's culture, because my dad was born in Utah. My mom was British, so she didn't really have that whole thing going on. So it was really fun for me. I really got into the whole bizarreness of some of the cultural aspects. And so, what do you think that is? Yeah. So I started playing with Jell-O and like saltwater taffy, and that's what it came. That painting got. So Jell-O, and it turned into this body of work where I did, stacked of sugary items, and sometimes there would be something hidden in the painting that had to do with something else, sort of a secret language that I liked playing around with. And I would just play with different ideas. I really was drawn to like it says in the bio that we read, I really like the old-time kitchen paintings, they were called, in the 16th and 17th century. So the first time people started painting their ordinary lives, and you can see these paintings of marketplaces with stacks of waffles from the 1600s in Holland and France and different places like that. So I really like that. I wanted to kind of emulate that, as well as look at some of the crazy stuff. When I was a kid, we would come to Utah to visit my great-grandparents, and we would go walking up and down Salt Lake. In the 60s, they used to have all these little shops with saltwater taffy machines. Have you seen those? They twist the taffy, and I was mesmerized, and I thought they got that stuff out of the Great Salt Lake. I was only 6, right? And if I'd only known, well, of course they couldn't, because it would kill you, right? There's so many chemicals in the lake. So I just played with a lot of these things, and then this is a shot in my studio. This is a painting I did of a Hershey's Kiss, which I'm still doing paintings like that. There's one of the Jello paintings there. There's caramels up on the top part. That's the finished Hershey's Kiss painting. It's pretty big. And then I laid in, just like Holbein did with a skull, I put in Rodin's sculpture of the kiss below it. And I think this is on my website. If you actually look sideways at the screen, you can see the sculpture. And it's a pretty clear image of it. And then I did the same thing with this bunny, with the Dürer bunny, you know, the Albert Dürer drawing of the bunny that's the most famous bunny drawing in the history of the world. That is, you know, looks like a shadow, but it's really the Dürer bunny. And so then I would say to the chef down at Sundance, who's a friend of mine, pastry chef, I really love that cherry chocolate cake that you make down there, and I love the coconut one. So he said, come down in the morning and bring your camera and stuff. So I come down, and he gives me one. This is a huge cake, and it's like that big around. I said, don't give me this cake because I'll eat it, and I'll have to have my friends come over. So I basically cut it up and then painted it, along with the coconut and cherry one. So, yeah, they're really amazing. I mean, I got addicted to these things. I bought it, and in fact, I bought a whole case of them, and I still have some. And you find people, like, they're made in a special candy shop in New England that specializes in ribbon candy. And the really good ribbon candy is amazing. It's not like the nasty kind of stuff that you find sometimes that people hang on their Christmas trees. It's really light and brittle, and anyway, it's beautiful to paint as well. So I've done some ribbon candy paintings. These are French macaroons, and they're like my favorite pastry of all time. And now they're kind of everywhere. You can get them in Salt Lake now. You can find them on the West Coast and in New York. Ice cream sandwiches of New York. Now these all you can find at different places in New York. And they every year they have kind of a list of the best in the city. And then I've done several versions. That was a small one, about 20 inches tall. And then this one is like a 4-foot tall version of that I did for a show in New York in 2012 last year. Valentine's candy hearts. I mean, I thought I would do this for a couple of years, but then people started coming to me and saying, oh, this is my favorite. You know, I love Red Hots, or I love Lemon Drops, or Valentine's. This is a cake. They won best cake in New York. It's a milk crepe cake. It's crepes with whipped cream layered in between. And you would think that'd be heavy, but it's wonderful. It's one of the lightest, most delicious cakes in the world. I'm drawn to things that can be simplified into very, very graphic shapes. I kind of am going more and more that way, less into the darker 16th, 17th century still life paintings and more into the pop art looking simple shapes. A friend of mine who's a banker in New York, he said, yeah, my comfort food is peanut M&Ms and Diet Coke. And he said, if you did a painting of that, I would definitely buy that. So I did a painting of that. Yes. Coke bottles. I have a fixation with Coke bottles, and the whole, like, for my whole life, there was just this crazy kind of Mormon thing about Coke. Like, do you have it in your house? We didn't have it in our house, but now, of course, we do. And some people would have Dr. Pepper or Mountain Dew, but not Coke, because Coke, which just seemed like too out there. So. And then there was this other thing called Mormon Mocha. This is called Mormon Mocha. Up at Sundance in the 70s and 80s, when I was at BYU, they actually served this beverage called Mormon Mocha, and it had kind of a mocha flavor to it. And we sort of created our own version of it, and it's still one of our favorite things to serve people. Yeah, this painting is actually right here on the table. It's very small. It's 8 inches tall and 16 inches wide. I've done several large versions of it since then, different kinds. This is called Sacred and Profane Pest. Who can figure out the riddle? Sacred and Profane Pest. It's a diptych. That's one hint. They're actually 2 square panels. Okay, what does the witch symbolize? And the bunny?
Easter.
And the snowman?
Christmas.
Okay, the sacred religious holidays. And what does Garfield symbolize? And what about Bugs Bunny? Looney Tunes, right? And Disneyland. So these are all the worldly kind of profane pests. But they correlate a little bit. So the smiles and I like this shape comparison thing. So I've done a bunch of these Oreo and milk paintings. Yeah.
You really just want to put that Oreo in the
You
milk.
do.
Yeah.
And I tell every once in a while somebody tells me something new that you would think I'd heard it all. You know, this lady I've been at the Leonardo doing a residency up there. I have a great big version of this. It's a much more complicated, I'll show you in a minute. And she comes up to me like she knows the secret. Like she invented this thing about how you should eat an Oreo the proper way. And I'm thinking, really? There's only like 3 ways, right? So she's like, no, you take a fork and you stick it into the cream, and then you hold it in the middle of the container. I'm like, man, you've got way too much time. I started putting in the actual surrealist tradition of Magritte, putting enormous objects floating in the sky over landscapes. I went to Denmark with some friends in 2007, and this is a Danish landscape, and I just wanted to pair it up with the ice cream cone. And this is kind of an East Coast, West Coast, the East Coast, New York skyline, and then the surf on the right side, the Diet Coke. This series started as a friend of mine in New York who's collected some of my work, calling me up one day and said, you know, my wife would love for her birthday to be surprised by a painting that included all of her favorite things that she lives on. And that's the painting on the right. She lives on that stuff. Can you believe that? I was painting and I was just thinking, wow, okay. And she really does actually live on that stuff. This is a great big diptych. This lives in a club in London now, but it actually is a very American painting. It's biographical. It has Los Angeles on the left, Timpanogos in the middle, or Sundance, and then New York on the right, on the horizon line. This is milkshake over Hollywood. I lived right behind the tar pits. In fact, in my yard, there was tar bubbling up from time to time. It doesn't just happen in the tar pit. If you've ever been down there, it happens in the whole area. And it's sort of kind of like a Valentine's in Los Angeles. And a friend of mine who's a Broadway theater producer, in fact, she's one of the producers of the Book of Mormon musical in New York. Jewish lady, didn't know anything about Mormons, and we have had the most interesting conversations that you would never imagine since that happened. But anyway, before that, she bought this painting for me because she also grew up in Los Angeles, and she had a strong connection to all of the kind of historic things that I put in the painting. So it lives, it overlooks Central Park now in New York. This is a painting that kind of has a classical reference with the 3 graces. But what I did is I stretched them out about 4 times wider than they are in the original Botticelli painting, because of course they've been eating way too much ice cream. And I put the 3 big oceans on the ice cream cone. So the Indian Ocean's at the bottom, The Pacific is on the strawberry, and the Atlantic is on the This is a big 4x6 foot diptych. The bottom piece actually is supposed to be with an inch separate. It actually makes the Atlas figure from Rockefeller Center really pop out because he spans both of the pieces. Even though there's a gap, your eye kind of makes up that difference. And this was kind of a fun departure for me. I had went to Egypt a few years ago, just before the revolution, and toured some of the tombs, and there was this beautiful golden kind of carved or bas-relief of these two men who were buried together in this tomb, and they had their profiles like this. But I thought, let me do this, but let me put in everything that we're addicted to in the painting. Not just sugar this time, but technology and coffee and alcohol and porn and Twinkies and credit cards, everything. And each of these panels, this is a big, like an 8-foot wide piece. Each panel, I think there's, I can't remember how many, anyway, they are magnetized so they come off and you can move around a little bit. It's a really fun piece. That was up in London in 2011. As was this, which was another interesting piece. When I got this show dates for my show in London at a gallery near Victoria Station, if you've ever been there, and when I got the dates for the show, I realized I was painting this already, and it was going to be called the Coke Genie, and it was Katherine Heigl morphing out of a Coke bottle. I had this really beautiful photograph of Katherine Heigl, a bust of her head shot. And in that same exact pose, the day I sketched Katherine Heigl's face on there, they made the announcement about the wedding. And I realized my show is going to be up during the wedding on the parade route. And so I thought, okay, I'm not going to tell them at the gallery because they might freak out. I'm just going to do this. And I couldn't even sleep for a few nights because I was just compelled to do this thing. It's like, have you ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind? And the guy who's like building that mountain, he just can't do anything else but do that. And that was me doing this thing. So I'm putting this thing together. They finally asked me to see an image of it. And it's life size. This is a 6-foot tall painting. And it's diptych also. The bottom piece comes down a little bit like the donut painting. And I sent it to them, and I get this call back. I usually get emails. I get this call back from the other. About the Kate Middleton painting. We're not really sure that that's going to be too cool because actually the gallery manager is the stepsister of the princess, Camilla's daughter. And so we were like treading in touchy kind of weird territory. I just said, look, just tell them I'm a stupid American. And you're going to love the painting. It's going to be beautiful. And if you don't want it to hang facing the street, that's fine. We'll hang it in the back where nobody can see it. And they were okay with that. But when they got it and they saw how cool it was, like a pretty good likeness of her, they said, oh yeah, we want to hang it. So it hung in the window right during the whole course of the royal wedding. And then the detail of the top part. And I was doing a little bit, like the top artists were always ripping off other people, so there's a little bit of Gustav Klimt going on. I wanted sort of the champagne bubbles happening, and kind of a gilded look of this painting. This is more like, I've included landscapes from places where I've lived, and this is behind my house up in Sundance. So I found these butterflies a few years ago, and they're all over the place. And I like to include things like that in my paintings. They have kind of a silver underwing. So when they're fluttering in the light, you see what looks like kind of a blinking. It's a really beautiful. This is called Pie in the Sky. I wanted to look a little bit like a Georgia O'Keeffe kind of painting with a desert landscape, but it's actually the Hollywood sign at the bottom there. And so Pie in the Sky is kind of a classic Hollywood scenario. And then a little homage to New York. I painted that the year before, in 2012. So now the Freedom Tower is almost finished. And I've hidden things up there. There's, in the ice cream, there's a Santa Claus upside down with vanilla. There's a chocolate tongue. There's a tongue licking you back right here. There's a tongue. There are people who come up to me and they think they see things in my paintings, and I'm like, yeah, that's right. So here's the other Oreo painting. I did a series of these. They've been collected by people in New York and the UK. And so I was painting Oreo over this the first time I did it. And I realized if I changed the E to an M and put M and N at each end, it would spell morning. And if you can't see it here, but you can see it on my website. I put some Mormon symbols in where there usually are just Oreo symbols, like shamrocks. So there's a temple, there's a moon and the sun and the stars, there's a beehive. It's all right up here. And so I'm going to have a close-up view of it. There's a beehive. There's M-O-R. And the temple's right up there. And then I found this great old map of Salt Lake City. And I've done several of these, like I said, but the one I just did is a 4x6 foot version from the year 1870. By that time, all my dad's people had gotten to Utah. Here's another, this is called Tantric Cones, and it's based on a mandala, which in Eastern religion is a meditation device where you see tapestries in Buddhist culture that are made out of these arrows kind of all pointing together. But it's more fun to meditate over ice cream. Most recently, I did something, again, more sculptural, like a couple of 3D things I've done. And last year, those of us who kind of thought it was kind of silly the way people would do that whole thing about, do you drink Coke? No. We're really relieved when that debate sort of ended once and for all last year. And so I designed the Coca-Cola logo writing to read Celestial, and put 134 bottles together on a stainless steel background. And it's shaped it's like 10 feet off the ground. And now it hangs over to Leonardo until sometime next month with a pink background. It looks really good on a pink background. And it's really fun getting comments from people and having them ask me about what it's all about. And how people look at it and say, I know it looks like something, oh, that's what it is. And I'm also simultaneously working on this big commission that I got earlier this summer. It's a painting for a cruise ship that is under construction right now in Florida. They wanted a version of a smaller piece that I did that you can see above, the little copy there in the photograph. 7 Hershey's Kisses in a row, and on a shining tabletop. It was a painting I did 7 or 8 years ago, but they found it on the gallery's website in London. You can see it on that website if you go there. It has to be finished by the end of next week. This painting this shot was done about a week ago, so it's come along further along since then. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a really fun ride to be in this world of crazy popular culture, worlds colliding, religion, all this stuff. Yes?
How long does it take for you to paint?
Something that big, 10 feet long?
Yeah.
It wouldn't normally take as long as it's taking because I'm doing it at the Leonardo and I'm kind of a monkey in a cage up there. With people always coming and asking me questions. It's fun to do, but usually it would take me about a month of straight studio time to do something this big.
How long is this?
This is taking me 2 months because I'm not there every day. If I really pushed it, it would be a little faster than that. But they have to have it shipped. I have to roll it and ship it and have the stretchers all made. And I had to have the canvas had to come from a special company that makes material for the theater industry that has to be fireproof. And so it was saturated with this chemical. It kind of smelled bad and made the canvas a little bit rubbery. It was really hard to prime it. So there are little obstacles like that, but it's worth it, and I hope they use me again maybe in a future project. Do you guys have any other questions? Yes?
How did you first start networking with magazines?
With magazines? When I started in the late 80s in New York, you could buy a list of art directors, and you can still do that. It's all done online now. When I left Art Center, I left with a bunch of friends who also moved to New York at the same time. Not exactly the same time, but when I got there were a group of people. And we maintained that same theme that I told you about before, is surround yourself with positive people who aren't threatened by you, who want to help you. And we just had a policy that we were going to help each other. We were going to swap Rolodexes, and the Rolodex is your memories. And so we did that, and we all had a lot of success because of it, because we all had different styles, and we didn't feel like we were really competing with each other. So you build a network like that, pretty much. But every time I went to the doctor's office, I would like write down my director's name in the magazine and stuff like that. Are you an illustrator?
No, but I want to learn more about more networking.
Yeah, networking is a really good thing to learn how to do, for sure. Yes?
You mentioned that for a while you had to make your portfolio a portfolio
Yes.
instead of a collection of schoolwork.
Yeah.
How did you go about doing that?
That is a whole class, a whole semester class that I teach at UU. But no, the short answer to that is it has to really be a concentrated body of work that looks like one person did it and not 5 people. Your tendency in school is to push yourself in all directions. And I had 3 different portfolios when I went to New York and got different work with each one. I had a black and white still portfolio that got me a lot of work. And I kind of had to switch hats and become a different person, because you don't want to, those people don't want to compete with each other, right? And my real work was the stuff that I just showed you that I really wanted to promote the most. But sometimes that wasn't getting me enough work, so I had storyboards that I did, stipple work, and then the other illustration work. But that's a very good question. And basically, you want all of your work to look like it's like the most beautifully presented show, and it all relates to each other. There's nothing in it that's kind of sour note. It doesn't look like it belongs there. Yeah. Any others? Yes.
How do you price your work?
How do I price my work? As high as possible. There are a lot of good answers to that question. You do comparables with people. It's hard because Utah's a very different market than London, for instance. The gallery will set prices for your work that you're in, and then you kind of have to get as close to that price point as you can. It's really hard to do that in other places sometimes, but you have to try to do that. And you network with people to do that as well. Am I what? What? You mean copying photographs? Yeah. Sometimes I use photographic reference. Yeah, that's what you mean.
Where do you get your inspiration to do?
Inspiration to do things? I have. I do my own stuff, and I think that's a really good question. When you're an artist, you have a creative block all the time. You can't afford to have a creative block because you have to be producing work all the time. So I have all my students keep a binder, a very thick binder, of collectanea or collected inspirational material. And I will even, I have a shell collection and a rock collection, but to get that stuff out and spread it out, I take pictures of it and have the photographic reference in there, as well as other things from magazines, things that I've taken pictures of in museums, things that really inspire me to get out of the creative block for the project. It's a really good question. Yeah.
You're into pop culture and food. Have you ever thought about doing a piece about genetically modified organisms like animals and food?
No, let me write that down. Thank you. What's your name?
Is that right?
Okay. Very good idea. I like you guys the way you think.
comes to putting out some characters.
Uh-huh.
What do you think influenced that or contributed to that style? Is there a particular artist that you pattern your work after?
So many, actually. I really like the Japanese woodblock print kind of style. I love Aubrey Beardsley. They're really pornographic, some of them, but they're amazingly drawn. And just so many other kind of stylized artists who have done amazing kind of drawing over time. Egon Schiele, another one. I have a ton of, because I love teaching drawing. I do, my favorite class teachers like drawing. So there's the life drawing class, and then there's going from there. And that's some really great teachers at Art Center who are really good at interpretive drawing, where once you've mastered kind of looking, which is what drawing really is looking and observation, then you can kind of take to the next level, which is what I love because of my whole crazy absurdist tendencies. That's kind of how my brain works. I'm crazy. Anything else? Yeah.
This is just out of curiosity because you seem like you've done like a lot of traveling. What's one of your favorite places to travel?
Italy. There's no end to stuff that's really the place. Yeah. A lot of places I haven't been, and I've got a long list of that. I'll never get to the end of it. I'm sure. Anyone else? Yes.
What do you like to use for medium to paint?
My mediums? Well, all the illustrations are watercolor. Good question, because I forgot to mention that. They're all watercolor. Sometimes a little bit of gouache because it's transparent or it's opaque, whereas the watercolor is transparent. A little bit of collage once in a while, but mostly just watercolor. And then all of the other stuff, the more recent look is oil. Or just straight up traditional oil. On panel or canvas, either way. Anything else? You guys have great questions. Seriously, I mean, this is pretty great. Thank you so much for paying attention, not leaving.